Let's get started.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to Alternatives to Suicide, Lessons from the Western Massachusetts Recovery Learning Community, a webinar co-sponsored by the National Empowerment Center and the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community. I'm Leah Harris, Communications and Development Coordinator at NEC, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm also a suicide attempt survivor myself and have been really inspired to work with other attempt survivors across the country to promote innovative and hopeful strategies like the one we're going to hear about today to help people cope with suicidal thoughts and feelings. This webinar presentation will last for approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes, with at least 30 minutes for question and answer and discussion. We are recording this webinar. The PowerPoint presentation and the audio recording will be posted to the NEC website at www.power2u.org within a few days. At the end of the webinar presentation, there will be a question and answer session. However, you are invited to ask questions at any time through the question function in your control panel. During the Q&A session, you may ask a question via the hand raise function if you wish to ask your question verbally. Questions will be taken in the order they are received. If we do not get to your question, we are recording the questions as well and will respond to you by email as soon as we can. I will now do a brief introduction of our speakers, whom we are very excited and thankful to have with us today. Janice Sorensen has been doing suicide prevention literally since the age of 8, while dealing with her mother's numerous attempts and later on in learning to navigate her own ideation. Thus, she understands the despondency that precedes an attempt, as well as what it is like to be the child of someone feeling that level of despair. She is grateful to be able to bring this knowledge to her work in suicide prevention. Donovan draws upon years of struggle with emotional distress and agonizing yearnings for suicide to put this once lost time to work in connecting with other folks. Through his roles with the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, and especially as a co-facilitator for Alternatives to Suicide groups, he has learned about the lives and struggles of others and about how to persist in thoughtfully living his own life. And now, without further ado, I will turn it over to our speakers. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here. And we are so grateful for the National Empowerment Center and Western Mass Recovery Learning Community for co-sponsoring this event. And we will get started right away. So we want to start by talking about the basics. And by the basics, we want to just give you some facts that today, and this isn't to bring you down, this is just to let you know why we do what we do. Today, 89 people will kill themselves in the United States. That's one suicide every 16 minutes. I want to let you know that, some of the material that you will be hearing today can be a little difficult. And so we just encourage you to be aware of what's happening for you inside your body and inside your head, and just be good to yourself. If you need to get up and get a glass of water and you're afraid you'll miss something, as Leah said, this will be available to you when we're done. Suicidality does not discriminate. And what we mean by this is we have come to know through our Alternatives to Suicide peer support groups that there is a particular people group that is at greater risk for suicide, and that is middle-aged and elder white men. But we also know that in our groups we've had young people, older people, we've had Black people, white people, Hispanic people, we've had people who are identify as transgender, we've had gay and straight people joining us. male, female. So it is a common human experience. And while that is a hard fact, it's also has an element of understanding that we are all part of this human experience, and there are so many things that we have in common.
So just to give a little preview about what we'll be discussing through this webinar, um, we're going to be talking to you about the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community's development of and format for peer-run support groups for people struggling with suicidal thoughts. So that's what we'll encompass.
Yeah, that's our main focus, is letting you know about these groups. What sets these groups apart, really one of the main things that sets these groups apart, is that the facilitators of these groups have lived experience with suicide attempts and or suicidal thoughts. It's something that we really value highly, is that lived experience and people knowing what it's like to be in that level of despondency.
And so part of the basis of our groups, or the premise, the idea behind our groups, is that empathic talking with certain degrees of empathy about suicide, coupled with an exploration of alternative coping strategies, will decrease suicide. So in a sense, there's a lot of talk about suicide prevention, and we, in a sense, talk about human connections and the idea that when people have um, a somewhat shared experience involving experiences of suicide, there's a lot more empathy that goes into the dialogue, and so coming out of that is, you know, the suicide prevention, but that's not the main focus, which
Right.
is connecting with other human beings.
Right, right. It happens naturally through the human experience. This in front of you is a lot of words, and I'm just going to read it really quickly because we put some time into what our value was for our groups. And so alternatives to suicide peer support groups exist because the opportunity to talk about feelings of hopelessness to empathic ears can decrease the inclination to act on suicidal feelings. The Western Mass Recovery Learning Community has started peer support groups of this kind in Western Mass. Alternatives to suicide peer support groups provide a forum wherein people who feel or have felt suicidal can talk about their experiences without being judged. People in these groups share their struggles and successes, provide support for one another, and strategize about alternatives to help each other best cope with the difficult life experiences and circumstances. People are encouraged to come in both times of strength or in challenging times. You need not be in crisis to attend this group. You'll notice those two last lines, and we're going to get to those a little more later because those are a big part of what we do and why we do what we do. So I'm going to just briefly breeze through today's agenda so you can just see what's ahead. The value of lived experience. The guy riding down the road knows this road, and he can share that with someone else. Myths and misconceptions about suicide.
We'll also be discussing the relationship to self-inflicted injury, and also some myths about that as well.
The history of our groups we'll be talking about.
And we'll also talk about various group approaches and formats within our Western Mass community.
The incorporation of a self-care tools list. That not all of our groups do this, but it's an interesting approach that if people out there at some point are interested in running a group like this, you might incorporate.
And then we'll also discuss a little bit about how we handle difficult situations and how that might help in your lives as well.
And at the end, as Leah said, we will have time for questions and answers. The power of peer support and lived experience for suicide prevention. You know, as many of us know, this power of lived experience is, it's not new. People have been doing this since humans were alive, sharing our experiences as humans, but it's making its way into the broader context of recovery, and we're excited about that. Our shared experiences help to build strong connections, creating more trust and hope. We have found this to be so true that once we connect and trust one another and build community, as Sean was saying earlier, it's the building of community that brings us this little spark that says, wow, something can change.
And one thing that I think is important to draw attention to in this sort of peer support that's part of our groups and beyond our groups in the greater community as well. You know, peer support asks what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. So in a sense, it allows people to speak from a standpoint of lived experience, like we had been saying, instead of trying to define what their deficits are. What's wrong with you is I think is a question that already has a lot of judgment in it.
Yeah, somebody is saying like, why are you broken? Like, you know, that's a lot different than like, tell me about your life.
Yeah.
And as you'll notice, all these images that connect with each page, these are all images, most of them that I took, and I had a great time choosing each image to go with the particular page. And I chose the swan because I remember the story of the ugly duckling, where everyone was saying like, you know, you're an ugly duckling, you're an ugly duckling, and you know, you've fallen short, when in fact the swan was what it was always supposed to be. And people barraging it with judgment of you're an ugly duckling was probably the most difficult part of its young life, if you will allow me to explore the life of a swan. And we know that to be true in our community too, that people and often within the medical model, just focusing on what is wrong, why are you the way you are, that can be the most difficult part of our experiences. And so this is a way to change that and to find a new way of recovery.
And sort of taking off from those two different kinds of questions, you know, this idea of peer support does not necessarily assume that there's a problem or a problem orientation. In spite of the fact that, you know, a lot of us are congregating around this shared issue of suicide, the conversations in our groups don't necessarily focus on that experience all the time. We'll get to this later too, but I think one of the great parts for me of being a part of these groups is that we laugh sometimes, like a lot. And I think in my experience with other support groups that maybe haven't been as defined in this particular kind of peer support, I remember even being told to not say much if there wasn't a problem in my life at the current time, and that felt really it strapped me of a lot of like the ability to speak about good things in my life.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story and how you had been thinking about going to that particular meeting, and you went for the first time, and you were advised to like leave room for somebody who really has a problem. And while we understand the need, and we'll talk about this later, to leave room for people who are having a difficult time, we want to be human together. We want to hear about our joy. I want to hear about the great thing that happened for you this week. And I think as we talk about each of these things, I'll in my mind be thinking, well, this is the most important part of our alternatives to suicide peer support groups. But it is an aspect that I think is so valuable. I want to also just mention, people, if you hear a little tweeting and chirping sound in the background, I have a big bin of 2-week-old chicks, and they're quite active sometimes. So just take it as beautiful, cheerful, sunny white noise. So we also know that it is assumed that there are many ways to understand an experience. So even though we have lived experience and a lot of commonality, my lived experience is very, very different than yours. And it really requires a level of deep listening. If I make assumptions about your statement and proceed with that, that so often can just bring a source of judgment. So we really hold in high regard the art of deep listening. So, and that's how we hear and understand truly what a person's experience is.
So we mentioned, or one of us, maybe both of us mentioned suicide prevention and how that's not our primary goal. And I think,
which can be confusing. People can say
confusing.
Like, what? Wait, I didn't sign on for that. I signed on for this.
But I think what this slide says really gets to some of why we make that distinction. So I'll just read that. When assessments and evaluations are not a part of the relationship between people, folks can express their needs to one another without threat or coercion. And by making this comparison or this distinction between what our groups do, providing that empathetic listening, peers in the sense that we're not in a group therapy session with a clinician or someone who holds power above and beyond other people. I feel like there's a lot of genuineness that comes out of the relationships and the conversations. So that's something that I don't think can happen when there is any element of threat or coercion in other situations.
Yeah, and the suicide prevention happens, but it happens on its own. We don't try to crack things open and peek inside and try to figure out the thing that we have to figure out to save this person. We rely on the genuine human connection, and we know that when that happens, it's really it acts as a fan on that little spark that is already within the person that we're supporting.
And I think also maybe it's worth mentioning that we, even as facilitators, we're participants, and to underscore that. And whether we're facilitators or not, all of us strive to remind ourselves that we can't assume that we know what's best for other people. Mm-hmm. And that kind of understanding comes from working together and having conversations, mm-hmm. essentially.
It's all about us supporting and challenging each other to grow and change. And so while we don't coerce anyone into whatever it is we might think is best for their lives, we do offer the challenge to connect, because sometimes that can be a challenge. So we offer the challenge to speak what's going on in your life, so that you're not holding this all on your own. So I'm not holding this all on my own. Sean's heard me say, and this is my summation of that very hard place, is that holding the idea of suicide is a phenomenally lonely vacuum. It is a place of deep loneliness. That's my experience, and that is why these groups are really helpful for me. Is it's that challenge of connecting.
Mm-hmm. So taking off from that idea as well, by building trust and kind of developing our own sense of hope between each other, people find that they can take more risks, myself included, and sometimes the risk is living. And to expand on what the last slide said related to this one, about both supporting each other and challenging each other respectfully, sometimes the risk is just trying to find a community again. In that too, I know in our groups, and certainly in my experience with the groups, learning to trust people was such a huge thing. And I know that for many people, like Janice had said, like, I think this isn't an uncommon feeling to think that these ideas of suicide come out of a really, really intense loneliness, and that can be a hard thing to bridge in relating to other people. So I think the idea of building trust and hope rather than having a situation of threat and coercion really like allows people to find like a way.
And if people have ever heard that, I think it's a quotation from Anis Nin, and it's, I promise you I'm going to get some part of this wrong, but it's something like, and the day came when the risk to remain in the bud became more painful than the risk to blossom, or something like that. And so that's kind of what this is about. And you'll see in the image is a sculpture of a person careening over the water on the back of a Pegasus. And it can feel like that sometimes. Yeah. Exciting and hard. Myths and misconceptions about suicide and suicide prevention.
So once someone decides they want to die, there is no stopping them. So this, as it's stated, is what we call a myth. And I think I think we've already said a lot about our groups that might contradict this. Basically, I think we've seen in practice with ourselves and with the people that we're in community with that this is definitely not a truism.
Yeah, there's connecting. As long as we connect, well, I mean, I know for myself that sometimes the thing that I want is to connect, to not be holding this thing on my own, and simply through connecting with another person and being able to share, to like this very hard nugget that I'm holding on my own can change everything. Myth. The best thing to do if someone says they are feeling suicidal is to immediately end the session and call in a supervisor so you can get help. This is, if I can call it my favorite myth, it's my favorite myth. Let me just say it first person point of view. If I am feeling suicidal and I just manage to get the words out, the words that I'm holding, the words that are just crying to be heard, and to create the connection that will convince me to live. If that session is stopped and a supervisor brought in, and whatever the follow-up of that may be, if I have the fear of going home and there are police at my door, or fear of being medicated or hospitalized against my will, I promise you I will never tell you again, because the one thing that I need, which is to talk about it, is the thing that changes everything. So we are really firm believers that people need to be able to attend these groups without fear of repercussion. And again, to immediately end a session, I have a woman friend who told me about this experience that she had, where she said that, and the thing was over. And it was, she was just starting to feel that sense of opening up, and then it all closed down.
So myth. Suicide prevention is best left to therapists and doctors. They are the experts. So basically, there's a saying that some of us use that kind of inverts this idea to say that, you know, the people that have been through the experiences of despondency, of utter hopelessness, like, and are still around to be here, like, we're the experts. And I think that kind of turns this myth on its head. But I also think that, you know, this is a very disempowering myth too, which is pretty. It exists in many different ways in many different places. I think the fact that, you know, there aren't many, from what I understand, peer support groups around suicide is a testament to how ubiquitous this myth is.
And I like to mention,
yeah.
this little bird here,
Yeah.
that I chose for this image. You know, if you want to know how to fly, you could ask the man or woman who designed the plane. You could ask someone who built the plane. You could ask someone who works on the plane. You could even ask the pilot, or you could ask the bird who holds the wings and orders the wings and feels the wind and the slipstream that it creates as it moves through the air. And that's kind of where we're at. We're the birds. Yeah. Myth. The best thing to do if someone says they are feeling suicidal is to tell them that life is worth living and to remind them of all they have to live for. It's so often the default that we have. It's hard to hear someone say that they're feeling that way, and you have this bird's eye view, this overview of their life, and you want to tell them, but your kids are so great, and you know, you've got that wonderful new project you're working on, or you know, it's almost spring. It's spring now. It is spring, and summer's coming. And we so often want to show people how great their lives are, but what a disempowering, invalidating thing that can be, to tell someone about this unexplainable, that's the key, the unexplainable despair, and have them try to explain it. Really, it's not helpful.
And also, I think it also, another way to say it, I think, is, which might be hard to see at first, is that I've had people say this to me when I've talked about feeling suicidal, and to me it felt awful. And I think one of the reasons why it felt so bad was because someone was one, not validating how much pain I was in, and two, it was almost saying to me, like, I didn't have the right to feel that way. And I think that's an interesting way to think of it too. And that's more distressing.
Yeah. Myth. People who attempt to take their lives are courageous, or people who attempt to take their lives are cowards. I've heard both of these. And I've heard both of them said with a pretty strong emotion behind them. You know, one of disdain and one of like almost admiration. And we are all humans. We all have our own human experiences. We all have various reasons for feeling the way we do when we do, and it's just not possible to summarize these two dialectics as being the reason. You know, it's so much more complicated than this.
So myth. people who talk about or attempt suicide are only trying to get attention and aren't really going to do it. Um, so not only is what I call this a myth, but it's also pretty judgmental sounding to me too. Um, and I think it actually has been really disproved in our groups, because we talk about suicide a lot. And I think, um, we've actually, I'll say I have found ways to feel less disabled by the feelings by talking it out with people who are empathetic and understand in some degree. And I think, um, I've heard this judgment on people a lot, that people talking, or even more judgmental, people who attempt suicide are only trying to get attention. Um, and that to me is a pretty disparaging thought about another human being, to say that this is their main goal in talking about ending their life, is that they're trying to get attention. And frankly, I say, like, what's to some degree, what's wrong with that? If someone is hurting so much that
Yeah,
this is an outlet, this is a way of expressing that, that is
I
unfortunately the only way, then what's to judge?
I really agree. Sometimes sometimes it's it is a way of my saying, it's synonymous. Let me put it that way. It can be synonymous with it's that bad. Um, and and if I let you know that this is what's going on for me, yeah, hey, maybe I need something. That's I agree with Sean. It's so judgmental and it's so unhelpful. And there's also the idea of that that it's at a point of no return. And as we said earlier, simply talking about it or being heard might be the thing that changes the situation. Myth. The best thing to do if someone says they're feeling suicidal is to get them to a locked facility where they can be on 24-hour watch so they cannot hurt themselves. We kind of covered this before. So here I am. I'm feeling alone and this deep level of despair, and then boom, the rug's pulled out. I'm hospitalized. I'm medicated against my will, and now how bad are things for me? And am I ever going to mention it again? Unlikely.
And then also, I think, what's not really spoken in this myth is, the long-term effects of being committed to a locked facility. I think I've spoken to people in other areas, like other than Western Massachusetts, who say, like, well, this is the only thing we have, and that might be true in people's minds, but I think the other side of that is that when someone, is hospitalized, especially if it's against their will and it's court ordered, um, it's not just the pain of being locked in a ward or a facility, that can be really distressing and dignifying for people, but it's the chain reaction of effects. When you've had your rights taken away, um, in that respect, there's more of a likelihood that you could have your kids taken away, you can be invalidated, in many other ways through the legal system, and I think that's something that, um, is maybe not on people's minds when they're feeling distressed for someone else, when someone's suicidal, but I
Right.
think there's another embedded experience, or many experiences, that are ramifications of being committed to a
Mm-hmm.
locked ward.
Yeah.
That's too.
Yeah. Myth. By law, as a mandated reporter, I am obligated to contact a supervisor when someone tells me they are suicidal. Um, this is this is one that there's been so much conversation about, and so much misunderstanding. People have an understanding. People believe that by law we are all mandated reporters to report someone who says they're feeling suicidal or may hurt or harm themselves, when in fact these are more agency policies. So, for example, whatever agencies you may have in your communities, some of them have um, policy and requirements of their employees. And for whatever reason, it may be a liability concern. What a mandated reporter is, in fact, is that if you are aware of an elder or a child or somebody who falls under the category as having a disability, if you know that they are being hurt or harmed or abused by a caregiver or someone else, you are to report that. It is not about hearing that someone is feeling suicidal. It is about elder, children, or people who fall under the category as having a disability. So perhaps the agency that you are a client or visitor of has that policy. Perhaps they have that policy. But we, as people who do this peer work, we are not required by law to report that. It's just a very, very wide misconception.
And I know that, yeah, Janice and I were trying to talk through what this actually means in some sense, the idea of mandated reporting. And I think much like the other myths that we're talking about, although there are clear things in law about what mandated reporting, what a mandated reporter is, it's so widely misconstrued. And I know talking to more conventional service providers, a lot of people misconstrue like agency policies with the law, and I think that's a big distinction to make, because that could be the difference of being able to support someone in really helpful ways, versus thinking you're legally obligated to take someone's rights away, essentially. So I think this is an important one.
Yeah. Myth. If you ask someone if they are thinking of killing themselves, they are more likely to do it because you have given them the idea. Well, that's in my opinion, a little bit ridiculous. Again, I can speak from my own experience that being in that lonely place and holding that myself is very painful. And if somebody were to ask me that, I would experience a relief, a feeling of relief, that I no longer had to hold this thing on my own, and it might be just the thing I need. I also am a person that wouldn't want to scare people, so that might be another reason that I wouldn't talk about this to someone just in passing. But having the alternatives to suicide peer support groups, where I know that we are gathered and we are agreed to hold this kind of pain for one another, I know that that's a place where I can speak freely about it, without feeling like I'm freaking someone out, because that would be a reason I might not say something. So
And another myth: the best thing to do if someone says they are feeling suicidal is to change the subject so they stop thinking about it.
Works for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, or maybe not even a 3-year-old. But obviously, I hope this is obvious to many people that this is not a very good strategy in supporting someone. Maybe it would be a person's reaction to hearing this from a close friend or a partner, and I can understand the motivations for not wanting to talk about suicide if someone hasn't had the experiences themselves, especially. But changing the subject is certainly not a very validating thing.
It's basically saying, I really don't want to talk about this.
Can't touch it.
Yeah, can't touch it. Myth. Self-injury is a pre-action to suicide. Let me repeat. Myth. Self-injury is a pre-action to suicide. We are going to talk about this even more. What we know is that for many people, self-injury can act as a self-care tool. And I hate to use just that little key blip word, but for a lot of people, self-harm of various kinds can act as sort of a release valve. And rather than kill yourself, you might need to do this other thing. Here's a statement that I think says it all pretty clearly, and I'm going to read this real quick. Self-injury should not be seen as an indication that an individual is suicidal, nor is it proof that they are not. Both self-injury and thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts are signs of inner turmoil or pain, but they should not be regarded as connected in the way that they traditionally have been. Being willing to sit with someone in pain, asking questions, and avoiding assumptions is far more helpful in almost every instance. Self-injury is a learned way of coping, and attempting to stop someone from self-harming may raise their risk of suicide, not decrease it. Sean, when we were first talking about this aspect of our understanding, he pointed out that there are so many ways that people self-harm, and some of them are kind of accepted, and some of them are so scary for people that they kind of just want to make it stop. And so that might be a reason that someone is hospitalized or medicated against their will because they've been cutting or burning, when in fact it's something that brings relief to a person and might act as an alternative to suicide. And here are some of those ways.
So on this slide, you'll see among the things we talked about, cutting and burning, but they're not there alone, and they're in the circle together, sort of in a spectrum. And when Janice and I were talking about how to talk about self-injury or self-inflicted harm, we were really I really was trying to put a lot of things that people maybe do that are more
hidden.
Socially.
You don't have a scar. You don't. Yeah. No one can see the burn, or no one can see if I've had, and this is one of mine. You can see toward the top there, self-imposed sleep deficit. Sometimes when I'm in a sort of state of crisis, I may keep myself up a couple nights in a row till 2 or 3 in the morning, and it's and I actually really know what it is in me that it just feels like I can make this choice. I'm in control. I can do this if I want. I can hurt myself if I want, and it does hurt me actually. Mm-hmm. It isn't good for me, and yet if people were to focus on that and to see that as my big problem, and like, oh we know what happens, she's going to be suicidal, it doesn't allow me to process through things. I now have come to a place in my life where I'm able to, when I notice that I'm moving toward that sleep deficit thing, I am able to make the choice for myself. There's so many things on here: smoking, eating, you know.
I think it's important to recognize that we're calling it self-inflicted injury or self-inflicted harm, and but it, this is sort of a more accepted language about a lot of this stuff. But I don't want it to seem like we're passing judgment on it, because I wanted to share that like I smoke and I love getting tattoos, and these are sort of things that I put on into the circle, and I think um, I want to make a distinction between calling these things essentially bad, or I think we're trying to make a more nuanced understanding of these things. And basically, I also share a good friend of mine has a coping mechanism of binging and purging, and she explained it to me really, really poetically, and I think I relate to it in some of my own coping strategies. But she said, I refuse food for a while and I binge and I throw it up. And the act of seeing the food come out of me is actually allows me to imagine getting rid of emotions that I don't know how to handle. And I think for me, that's a pretty good metaphor for some of the things that I have taken on as coping mechanisms. And this friend and I talked about how um, we don't know where we pick these things up. It's maybe not important, but what is important is being able to talk about it in ways that don't bring judgment onto you.
Right.
And in that way, and might seem like a paradoxical thing, but I think it's related to our discussion about suicide, of course, too, is that in talking about it in non-judgmental ways, I think people find, or I'll say for myself, like binge drinking was certainly a part of my life for a long time, because I had no grounding. I wasn't sure if I was going to be alive the next week. So why refrain from these coping strategies? But I think talking about it in non-judgmental ways for me has allowed me to not be so hard on myself, and actually finding other ways of relating to people and coping that might be less harmful.
And we can kind of have the faith in one another that that it works until it stops working. So whatever whatever uh, whatever thing it is that a person may be doing, if we can just be there with them and support in hearing without the judgment, um, we can have the faith that whatever that thing is, it's working right now, and at some point it may stop working, and that is for every individual to decide for themselves. We can't decide that for another person. And this is Ruta Mazalis. She does a lot of work around the issue of self-inflicted harm and injury. She has a newsletter that she did for a long time called The Cutting Edge. She did that with the Sidran Institute. And she has gone into facilities where there are, young women who are labeled like the toughest, or the most far gone. That's how they're viewed. And a lot of the girls in this facility, one in particular that she spoke of, were cutting themselves. And what the community, actually the people who worked there were doing was just making sure to take away any sharp object. And Ruta was very aware of the fact that doing that, taking a sharp object away, is not going to change things or stop that behavior. It may temporarily, until the person is unlocked from the room or whatever, and then if the issue has not been dealt with, it will just happen at a later time. And Ruta went in there and she said, will you give me, I don't know if it was like a week, she was like, will you just give me a week and let me try? And she went that approach of asking rather what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. She took the focus off the cutting and off the burning and put it on, like, what is happening for you, what is going on inside. And she has a lot of credibility with people in this area. She said she's gone to, and she's spoken this in public, so I'm not revealing anything that she hasn't freely revealed, but she's gone to conferences and facilities as the expert in this field, and then she takes off her jacket and her arms are covered with scars. And this, this actually really gave her a certain level of credibility with these young women, because they knew that she knew what was going on for them, and she was taking the focus off the behavior. Okay, history of and various approaches to our groups. We have 3 basic parameters for our alternatives to suicide peer support groups. One is that we can share our thoughts of suicide, but we avoid painting pictures. So we want to hold space for someone to tell about a difficult time they're having, or something that was difficult for them in their lives, but we ask people to try to keep the level of detail so that others in the group are not kind of traumatized through their stories. We want to hold space for people, but as we say, we don't want to hear about a rope that's purchased, or we don't want to hear about blood. You can tell about a hard time you're having.
And I was talking to someone outside of our community about this yesterday, and they said, well, sometimes I might want to talk about these things, and I said, yeah, like that's understandable, and that's in part why we have 2 facilitators.
Right.
If someone really needs to talk in detail, one facilitator might be willing to step aside outside of the group and have that conversation. But another perspective that I lended is that when people talk about details, often they're not talking about how they felt or what was going on inside of them. And this woman and I kind of were just commenting that when the focus is on the details and the actions, it almost reads like a police blotter instead of talking about how people are feeling. And I think in our groups, there's a real sensitivity to how people are talking about themselves. And that's I think part of my understanding of why this is an important parameter too.
And we can share our thoughts without fear of repercussion. We've talked about that already. We can participate in times of strength and times of sorrow. And again, we've talked about that. I've been in our groups where we just had deep belly rolling laughter. And in the same gathering, we've had, quiet and holding and listening, holding that space and listening, and people really expressing some pretty deep emotional feelings and thoughts and stuff. So we, our groups, we had really the thought for a while, should we have closed groups? Should we have open groups? We understand the benefits of both. We understand the benefits of a closed group, that a group of people can become really tight and have a really intense, deep level of trust. And in an open group, there's greater space for someone to come in who may not have been there before, but who may be in a place of despair. And we've opted to keep our groups open, and part of that was because with the closed group, once somebody decided to leave, whether they were moving or whether they just felt like they were ready to move on, and or had a scheduling conflict with that the night of the group, there would then be something like a 3-week window wherein people were notified that they might be able to join the group. Well, that's a pretty slim window. And if you're not feeling, you know, uh, in a difficult space at that time, or and 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 so then it's hard to conceive of going to a group like that. Or if you are in a very difficult place and feel like, wow, I don't even have it in me to like respond to this email, it makes it very hard for people to just have their um, daily human experiences and feel like, okay, now I'm ready. um, we've had people say that they thought for weeks about coming to the group before they ever felt capable of walking through the door. And if we don't have an open group, that it doesn't allow for that kind of decision making. What I also love about our open groups is that we tend to have a real solid core group of participants who and that group morphs very slowly. Like one person may leave for a couple weeks and then they come back, or but there's usually 4 or 5 or 6 people who are real regulars. And what I say is that they kind of hold a nest where newcomers can land, and where there's a climate that's already set, and there's um, a community that's already strongly in existence, and we welcome that new person. So yeah, we are pretty clear now that we prefer to have open groups for these gatherings. Our groups came to be 2008 RLC, through Tapestry and the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention, received funds to start the Alternatives to Suicide Peer Support Groups, or Alt to Sue. And a Northampton group started. That was a closed group. And then we had several attempts to get other groups going, and they kind of, got a little bit going and then kind of fizzled off. And then we had a new approach in Greenfield where we invited people to come to 2 different presentations, and we offered a list where people could sign if they even just had interest in an Alternatives to Suicide Peer Support Group in Greenfield. And we found that that was a really good way to connect with people ahead of time. And so that group got going and is going strongly now. And then the Northampton group, they revised their format to being an open group, and there are 2 new facilitators for that, and that group is going strong. Sean is facilitator for that group. And then we have a Springfield group that has started. On a typical Tuesday in Greenfield, we will gather, and we start off with a 3-minute check-in, and each person does their check-in, and we usually listen for some kind of common theme that may occur within the check-in time. And often there is something that comes up, whether it's about family or financial stress, or issues around trust, or whatever it is. And then we will just sort of start talking on that. During our 3-minute check-in, we ask people to let us know if they need more time for more in-depth sharing. And I really, really love the level of ownership that all the participants in our groups take. The way we started the Greenfield group is that we had a first gathering where we asked people to come who were just interested in participating in an Alternatives to Suicide peer support group. And we went over and wrote up a list of shared values. So what I love about this is that the participants in this group created their group agreements and their format. We talked about, like, should we have an open group? Should we have a closed group? Do we want to, you'll see the second one on that list of our shared values was, we agreed that we wanted to start and end on time. You know, we talked about, like, hey, do we want this to be somewhere where it can just be sort of really casual, and if somebody walks in, that's okay, and people can come for part of it or leave or whatever. We said, no, we really want to hold the value of starting and ending on time. We decided that as a group. We decided as a group that we have a shared value of not feeling the need to fix one another. And that's something that Sean has referred to throughout this, is it's not, we don't want someone to leave and sign a contract that says that I promise within the next week I will not attempt to take my life. We are not there to fix one another. We are there to be together and to support one another. So you can see over the rest of this shared values list, and that's exactly what it was. It was just saying, what do we want for our group? The next week we got together and we said, okay, now what from this shared values list do we want to build into our group agreements? And so from there we wrote up our group agreements, which I don't have here, but a lot of the things on this list you will see also on our group agreements. And oopsie, I just want to go back one more second. We also, in Greenfield, we have a list that we put on the walls, and it's called our self-care's tools list, which is something that I really love. And what happens is, as people are talking in our groups, if, for example, Sean is talking and he mentions that things were kind of hard and he decided to go for a run. He might say it very casually. Oh yeah, I was feeling bad and I knew I should go out running, and I went running, and then I went and did this other thing. If I'm in the group with him and I hear something that sounds like a self-care tool that he may not even recognize himself as a self-care tool, one of us will go write it on the board. And there's something very affirming, because I've been in the group where I was talking about, I was in a kind of a state of turmoil and crisis, and I knew what I needed to do was go on the porch and brush the dog. That is sort of like this Zen practice, Zen in the art of dog brushing. And somebody goes and writes that on the list, and it just occurs to me, like, oh my goodness, that's actually one of my self-care tools. So it's very affirming to have this list. And then we have our Springfield group, and the main characteristics of that are that it's a racially diverse group, and with a racially diverse facilitation. It's got strong male attendance in that group for whatever reason, and that is also an open group. And then Sean's going to talk about North.
Actually, I might go back to Springfield for a minute. So something significant about Springfield too. All of our different cities have different communities, and that definitely impacts like how our groups are different too. Mm-hmm. In Springfield, there's also a lot of folks that are primarily like Spanish speaking from the Latino community, and I think I've talked to some folks in Springfield who do the group, and I think sometimes it's good to be aware of doing groups about suicide and how different communities or cultures approach that. One very real difference is that the language for suicide in English versus Spanish could be different depending on where folks are coming from. And I know the folks that do the group are great, but it's mainly an English-speaking group. So I think that's something to think about for folks that maybe are interested in starting groups or just being aware of a community. And then I'll talk about the Northampton group, which I co-facilitate for. I'm also a part of as a participant.
Oh, and let's tell what time.
Oh,
when
yeah.
does that group meet?
Yeah, so we meet once a week on Mondays from 6:30 to 8. So it's like a later evening group, which seems to work for people in Northampton. So we just do a 3-minute check-in or 2 minutes depending on how many people we have. Our group kind of ranges pretty largely between 4 and 12 people. So 12 people can be a lot of folks to allow space for, but we try to do our best to facilitate that. And much like Janice in the Greenfield group was sharing, the group shared values. We have some values too that we share at the beginning of every meeting. I appreciate having Greenfield's written out. Ours are not, because we decided we didn't want to have something written on paper because our participants change a lot, and we thought that it would just be good to have certain core values that reflect the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community's values, which we'll talk about later on. But those briefly include the idea of mutuality between all folks, the striving for genuine human relationships, optimism and respect, and just kind of like the idea that people know what's best for themselves, like the idea of resilience and personal strength. We'll talk more about that a little later. But we also adhere to those values of, wanting to share about suicide, but maybe challenging each other to not get too graphic so that we're not pulling each other down in some sense. We also have developed a sense that not only do we start and end on time, but we really find that when people come later, like later than 15 minutes even, it really is disruptive. So we're trying to negotiate how to be inclusive of people and their various approaches to being on time or not. And just that when people come in a little bit later, it can be really alarming sometimes if someone's in the middle of a very deep thought or a very vulnerable moment, even if the person entering the group is familiar to all of us. So that's something we've been trying to negotiate too. And one more thing that I think is interesting, we try to, or two more things, we try to really emphasize as co-facilitators, both Caroline and I who do that facilitation work, that we are part of a larger community, the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, that is. So we really try to emphasize that our group is only one part of this, and that we have community centers in Holyoke and Greenfield and Springfield and Pittsfield, and a peer respite in Northampton, and that's all part of what keeps us strong as a group. And we also decided as a group that we were going to try to maybe have like fun together, be acquainted with each other in a different space. So a lot of us have been going almost weekly for almost a year now, and that's a lot of time to get to know other individuals. But at the same time, we realize that we're coming to the same space at the same time, sitting in a similar formation, and there's limits to what can be said in 90 minutes. So we're really striving to just go bowling or do something fun, acknowledging that we really appreciate spending time together, and that's been important. That really goes beyond the idea that we can only communicate together when we're feeling sick or feeling bad or feeling suicidal, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
So
dealing with difficult situations. You can see the image I have here. It's actually a little fire pit before it had logs put in it. And there's a little heart in the middle. And for me, this is about learning to simultaneously default to your heart place and your intuition while holding the things that you've learned are helpful or not. So in other words, we don't want to like quickly jump to a quick fix, like, oh, you've got everything to live for, or, oh, why don't we just go shopping? So finding that way of listening, deep listening with your heart, is really the best first default place to go in a difficult situation. And really, so often, if somebody is in a really hard place, being heard, really being heard, can be one of the most helpful things. We also just find that having some awareness of some of the facilitation basics can really help in a difficult situation. And that starts for our community with having an understanding of trauma-informed practice. These things like Sean was talking about, if somebody's coming in late and there's somebody who's in a vulnerable place who's talking, or how to deal with that situation. And what we do in Greenfield is someone will get up, and one of the facilitators will get up and speak to the newcomer. And if it's only a few minutes in, we will just kind of say, oh, why don't you quietly join us? Because we don't want somebody to be standing there and just feel like, oh my, maybe their first time there, maybe they got lost. So you want to acknowledge the person and yet allow the group to continue to flow. And again, each group will have its idea of what's a reasonable amount of time for somebody to come in. If the group is so far underway that it will throw everyone totally off, we'll just very kindly say, we're so glad you're here, and here's, I'd like to give you my number if you want to talk during the week, and I can let you know about more about the group when it starts and things like that. So just acting with kindness. Yeah.
And then just the idea that each individual group defines like their own community agreements or comfort agreements. As you probably or might have seen when Janice and I were talking about the 3 different groups in our greater community, like there's variation. And I'll say for the Northampton group, we've certainly adapted our values or our agreements to respond to who we are. That changes. So I think it's been really important for me, and I imagine other people in the group too, to have that fluidity. We do have certain values that keep us going and got us started in the first place. But I think having that ability to adapt and change is so important. And it kind of, for me, gets at the idea that gets at the grassroots element of it, that as opposed to saying we need to leave suicide prevention to the experts, which could be confused for facilitators too. We're actually creating a community agreement, and that can change, and that's been really great for us to be able to respond to new things that we never would have anticipated.
Mm-hmm. So. And then there are some very little things, very simple ways to express trauma-informed care, simply by having space between the seats. If any of you have ever been to a gathering, a conference, a workshop, and all the seats are just smack touching one another, and I tend to hold my arms in at my side, and I need my personal space in order to feel just a basic level of comfort. So I do that for myself, and I want to assume that other people may need this kind of thing too. It's not easy. We will, oh, and else along that lines, Sarah Mauser, who facilitates with me in Greenfield on Tuesday nights, and Curry Murphy, we switch off facilitating. I love Sarah always makes sure that there is at least one empty seat. Because what we don't want is for somebody to walk in the room and feel like, oh, I've caused a problem. You know, it can be hard enough to walk through that door the first time without feeling like you're an inconvenience. So we always try to make sure there's at least one seat empty. On the bottom of this image, this page, you can see, assume that trauma is the norm, not the exception. There's a saying that I love, which is the three most important things in life are to be kind, and to be kind. Hold on. And we know the importance of just having a my you saw that little thing on my screen, I'm sure, because I'm on screen share, so there was a slight moment of panic as my batteries looked to be running out. We assume that trauma is the norm and not the exception, and we treat people with kindness. It's a really easy way to express trauma-informed care, and we try to start and end on time. There was one point where I would be in the space before a group was supposed to start, and I would be doing work, and it got to the point where somebody would come in for the group and I'd be rushing around cleaning up my stuff, and then I realized, you know what, this person is walking into my frenzy. And so I've worked on that, and I try to make sure that the space is welcoming and homey, and I usually try to get the hot water on for tea, and just so it has a homey feel.
And then just as a supplement to the idea that assuming that trauma is the norm, not the exception, I think it's really useful for understanding why we've talked about some of the things we have, but I want also to add that it doesn't mean that we assume people are fragile or that people can't grow and change, which I think has been clear, but right. I just wanted to underscore that too.
Yeah, we don't infantilize.
No.
We don't it's one of the things I love. We act as peers together. We act as adults and treat each other with respect. The facilitator is not the hub of the meeting. Some meetings, the facilitator may be the hub of the meeting, but not for these groups. The facilitator need not comment on or answer every question or fix every problem or evaluate every statement. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a gathering where the facilitator, it was like facilitator, they field something or they call on someone and then they comment on it and then they call on someone else and then they comment on it. The facilitator in these groups, oh, I thought it was a different next slide. Yeah, well, the facilitators of these groups are participants as well as facilitator, and we really hold that very high regard. Really, co-facilitators are a must. For various things that you've heard already, if somebody's having a hard time and really needs to step out of the room, we want someone to be available if that person would like to have an extra ear. If somebody walks in late, it's helpful to have another facilitator so that they can go and speak to the person and let them know what's going on and whatnot. Suspend judgment. This is one that we feel very strongly about. It is not helpful. It is not helpful to say to somebody, but how could you think of doing that? You know, you've got your kids. How could you think of doing that? Think of all the people you left behind, or you would leave behind. There's so many, or like, how could you cut? How could you do the things you're doing? It isn't helpful. Most of the time, we're all judging ourselves fairly harshly, and just getting beyond that and getting to a place where we're of non-self-judgment is huge and wonderful, and the kind of thing that can allow us to grow and change. If I'm if I'm sitting around just judging myself, it debilitates me. I can't move forward. And if I'm being judged by somebody else, you know, um, I I'm more likely to walk out of the room actually and tolerate. We want to model the skill of interrupting respectfully if someone is running over time, and um, balance that with knowing when not to interrupt. And there can be just some really gentle ways of saying, like, oh, Cameron, what you're saying feels really important, and I'm wondering if we can come back to that, and just move on with the check-in, or Sandy, can you hold that? It sounds like you really need some more time at the end too, and I really want to make sure that we get to what it is you're talking about. But I remember also that Karen said that she wanted a little extra time too. It's really, again, it's about doing things kindly and not scolding somebody. You know what? You've really taken up a lot of our time already. We really need to move on. That is not helpful.
Yeah, and I think by learning how to interrupt respectfully, I think based on that idea is also doing that non-judgmentally, which I think Janice was just describing in a way. And I can give like just a quick example, like of a time when I was challenged to find a way to non-judgmentally interrupt, which involved a self-judgment too. Like someone in our group was referring to themselves with a derogatory word, which was kind of surprising to me. I never heard them say that before, and it was really hard for me to hear because it was a word that was hurtful. And if that had been said from one individual to another in the group, I think one, if not a lot of us, would have respectfully interrupted and said, "That's feeling really like harmful here right now." But because it was someone saying it to themselves, it was a harder thing to deal with, and so I was trying to figure out a way to acknowledge that we were feeling shut down as a group. And what I thought to say is, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Basically, just said what I just said, but I feel like if we're going to challenge each other to grow in this group and have respect for each other, I think that applies for how people express having respect or judging themselves too. And we were able to have a discussion about how that does relate to ourselves too, as much as it does to the way that we address other people.
Yeah, and in Greenfield, we have as one of our group agreements respect for self and others. And one of the things I say when we go over that one is, I can refer to myself and say, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. Oh, I'm such a jerk." And what we've come to know is that there's something called brain etching, which is, the more you go over something, the deeper it is etched into your brain, and the greater the long-term learning on that thing, whether it's playing tennis using the right swing, or whether it's going over a recipe in your mind over and over again, that after using the recipe book for 2 weeks, you then can put the recipe book down because you've got it memorized. It also can happen with children or with others around us. If you're saying, if you say to your child over and over, or to other people, "Oh, she's shy, she's shy. Oh, don't worry about her, she's shy." Well, the child learns, like, "Oh wow, I'm shy." Well, if I keep saying, like, I'm such a jerk, I'm such an idiot, my brain, my mind believes me. And so it's one of the reasons why we really try to hold respect for self um, up there. And as Sean said, oopsie, sorry guys, we wouldn't allow somebody to say that to about someone else. So we really want to not be referring to ourselves with that kind of language. Okay, and do not over control. That's something that we really want to instill in people, the idea of not over controlling your group. We want to honor the format of the group by reviewing group agreements. And as Sean was saying, in the Northampton group, they go over the RLC's defining principles. And those are, and we're going to just go over this quickly. The core values of the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community are genuine human relationships. And this is going to be online, so you can look this over later. You can go to Prezi, and which is the format that I'm using here, and you can write in alternatives to suicide peer support groups, and this will come up, and you can look further into these defining principles. So genuine human relationships, self-determination and personal strength. Yeah, so with self-determination and personal strength, we have an agreement that if somebody does not show up for a group, we do not call them and say, hey, you missed group, why weren't you there? We hold each other as adults and that we have our own self-determination and personal strength. And if for some reason we choose not to go, then we have a very good reason for it. We may see somebody outside of the groups as a friend, and it's fine to just say, hey, we missed you or whatever. We're real people, genuine human relationships, mutuality, optimism, healing environments, and respect. Now, again, the reason we're going over this to address the idea that this is under the category of difficult situations is because if something happens in group between a couple of people, we can always go to our defining principles and say, I'm really noticing that your voice is getting louder and it makes it hard for me. So that's a way that I own it. And I just want to remind you of our defining principle of respect, and that we really need to hold that in this room and in this group. And we also have the understanding that the defining principles are not rules. So we really refrain from having hard and fast rules, but things are up for discussion, and everything is worth a visit. In a peer-run group, all participants take ownership and share the responsibilities. We allow that, and it makes for more mutuality. The facilitator is a participant in these groups. The facilitator is in the background as facilitator and in the foreground as participant. This is really, really important to the equilibrium of the group. And this is something else that you might want to look over on your free time. Possible questions, statements, and strategies for helping individuals who are suicidal. I'm just going to look at a couple of these real quick. And again, you can go to Prezi and alternatives to suicide peer support groups, and you can find this presentation, and you can look in greater detail at some of these if you have curiosity. You might ask somebody, are you speaking seriously about what you want to do, or are you just venting? It may very well be that a person is just venting. You can say, do you want to talk more about what's going on? These are helpful statements that you can make. And even if you just go over these once or twice, they can get, as I said, kind of etched in your brain, and it can be a great way to internalize.
We are going to now use our remaining time for Q&A, and just remember that these resources and things that they were referring to, we'll make those all available to you. I will email the group, everyone who registered, so
and
you'll be
big
able to.
Apologies for that, folks. That had to be a little awful.
Oh, we're just so glad you're back. So here, I'm going to start off with the first question. Somebody was wondering if they can obtain that list of shared values from the Greenfield group that you had shared earlier?
Yes. In fact, what you can do is go to Prezi, which is the platform that I'm using for this. So if you Google Prezi, if you Google Prezi, um, can you can you hear me?
Yes.
If you Google Prezi, and then write in and search for alternatives to suicide peer support groups, you will find that presentation that I did. And if you scroll through, you will find that self-care, that shared values list. So again, it's Prezi, Prezi, and then search alternatives to suicide peer support groups. And you will find that shared values list.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to get you the link to that as well. And then the next question is, someone is saying that they're the coordinator for their statewide support line. They've been searching for a crisis training to help people prepare for difficult calls. And she was wondering if you have a full training that you promote or present that could help her.
Yes, well, we have this training that we have taken to different organizations and presented. And what can be really helpful about that is if we do know a group's focus of what they are really wanting to put attention to, we can put some focus on that. So we could put focus on the idea of warm line sharing.
And in the trainings that we've done recently, the focus wasn't on hotlines or warm lines, but actually starting groups like ours out here, or variations. So we did a sample group during the time when we were present there, and yeah, I can imagine we could do variation on that.
Yeah. So yeah, Sean was saying what we've done is we've presented essentially what you see here in the morning, and then in the afternoon we do a little bit of focus on one issue, and then we can do a sample alternatives to suicide peer support group so people can really see what that feels like. But if somebody wanted to contact us to possibly come in and do a training that addresses how you might do some warm line attention for this, we can happily address that.
Janice, will do you have a slide with your contact information or the way that people can?
I will make one.
No, no problem. Maybe you can just let people know the best way to get in touch with you. We can post that at some point.
Sure. We could actually probably hold up a card that we wrote out in a minute.
Okay, that's perfect.
But if you want to read us more questions, we can respond to that too.
Okay, great. So our next question is, I am a peer worker at a state facility and I do have reporting requirements. Any suggestions on how to deal with that if we were to start an alternatives to suicide group?
Yeah, that does make it difficult because the idea of the groups is that a founding premise for the groups is that there be no repercussion if somebody says they're feeling suicidal. And if somebody has that as a agency policy, it's just kind of, it's not really a right fit.
Yeah, I will share. We've talked a little bit about what the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community is, but I think we could expand on that a little bit now. We in Northampton, we do our groups in a Quaker meeting house, and in Greenfield, they actually use one of our community centers that's part of the recovery learning community. So we're not really based in any spaces that are functioning as hospitals or respites or service providers for a very intentional reason. And that's, while we are not clinicians and we have lived experience as facilitators. The spaces that we use also reflect that, which I think is pretty important. And I think that's a tough question for me to answer, because I don't know what state you're responding from, and I don't know a lot of the state laws. But as Janice said, I would feel very uncomfortable having this sort of group um, in a situation where there are legal repercussions, and I don't think I'd feel very open to talk about things personally.
Yeah,
So
it's just one of the
tough.
main premises. I'm sorry that doesn't answer in a very in a way that gives much possibility for that. But
Now, I do think, if I could add something else, that taking some of the ideas about responding um, in a way of communication and with empathy, with asking questions, can still be taken. But if you have some sort of um, requirement or obligation in your job to report people who are feeling suicidal, that doesn't feel very comfortable for me.
you know, I wonder if it's possible to talk to a supervisor or whatever and say, you know, I just attended this webinar and this is really wonderful, rich stuff. I'm wondering if we could utilize these values for this particular group. I don't know if they could make an exception for that. I do have, for anybody who might be interested in bringing Sean and I in for a training somewhere, the person to contact would be the director of the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, and kind of run your request by her. And here is, oh, is that backwards?
Yeah.
Oh, it is backwards. Oopsies. That's not very helpful. But I will tell you, her name is Sarah Davidow, and her email is SERA, Sarah, at westernmassrlc.org, and that's Western MASSRLC.org. So she would be the person who could talk to someone about the possibility of starting a group somewhere.
And I know there were some other questions that Leah had for us.
Yeah, thank you. We got a question that somebody said, if somebody is feeling like they want to go home after the group and follow through with suicide, what as a peer can we do?
Could you repeat that one more time, Leah?
Sure. The person is asking basically if they're feeling like they want to go home or after the group to complete suicide, is there anything that we can do as peers in a situation like that? Or have you dealt with a situation like that?
Yeah, I will share that. Thankfully, in my experience, a lot of the people that come to our groups in a very awful state often don't leave that way, and so that's a comforting thing in my mind. But there have been occasions where someone is still feeling that burden, that weight, when the group's over. And I know that Janice and I have talked about that, and sometimes people, whether they're facilitators or not, will step up to say, would you like to go out for coffee? Would you like to take a walk and continue the conversation? And I can talk about one really tough instance where I just I tried to remain I tried to express that I had trust in the person to know what's best for them, and that I said I'd call them the next day, and hopefully we would communicate, and that was my hope. But that at the same time I know it's best for them, and we did talk the next day, and I think it was tough for me to not feel responsible for the other person, but it's a thing that has to be learned, that we are ultimately not responsible for another person's life, and that might be a tough thing to hear, but I think that's been something I've had to learn.
Yeah, I'll start by saying we almost, well, no, actually, I think every time somebody has come in a very, very difficult state and said at the beginning, you know, I really need a little extra time. I'm having a really hard time, and I'm, you know, been thinking about dying. At the end of our groups, we have a 3-minute, what we call until next time, because we kind of had this thought of like, we've been calling this checkout time, and that we kind of all laughed about it, like that feels a little strange to have alternatives to suicide peer support group, and we're saying like, okay, who wants to check out? So we call it till next time. And during our till next time, it's been unbelievable to hear what the trajectory of the evening has been for people. And really every time people have said, I feel so much better, thank you everybody, or, you know, I feel, you know, things, I feel a real shift. And as we mentioned earlier, the facilitators are also participants, and participants are encouraged to take ownership. I mean, it just sort of happens. And other participants have gone to the person afterwards, like Sean just said, and said like, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. So everyone takes ownership, and it would be nearly impossible for me to facilitate a group if I thought I was responsible for everyone in that group, whether they lived or died. It would just be too much to hold. I could not possibly do it. And again, it's that self-determination and mutuality where we respect people to be getting what they need, asking for what they need, and we're there to support. And people come in, and so I've never had a worry afterwards of like, oh, you know, maybe the group didn't work for them. It's just the way it's happened. It's always had a positive departure. Are there other questions, Sean, that we have on that list?
Well, there's a sort of a related
Yeah,
question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Did you want to add on to that, Sean? Sorry.
No, I
Okay.
was just saying that I
Okay.
thought I remembered seeing other questions before we
Well,
got to that.
this is somewhat related. The person asked, has anyone from the group ever actually completed suicide, and if so, how did that affect the group?
That has never happened for any of our alternatives to suicide peer support groups. And to be honest, I, I don't want to have like a false sense of like, we are successful. This has never happened. If it were to happen, I think there would be a lot of gathering and processing together, and supporting one another in that kind of loss. It has never happened, and obviously we hope it never happens. Um, I don't really move toward each group with the kind of thought of, you know, this better not result in something horrible. It just our trajectory is optimism, and we move with an assumption of hope. And I can imagine that would be a phenomenally difficult thing to deal with. We've never had to deal with it.
And I'll kind of expand on that too. You know, I think optimism to me means a lot more than just thinking
Yay!
positively. I think it means also challenging myself as a participant, as a facilitator, and other people in the group too, to act out of places of trust for other people and respect, and not to necessarily come from a position of fear. And I'm saying that to mean that if I had in my head every week that oh God, I hope someone doesn't kill themselves, like I couldn't function in my life or as a facilitator. So I think we really try to really respect the fact that we're present together for 90 minutes every week. And I know that it's probably it's a good question, but I think it's also something that doesn't cross our minds a lot. And if we've dealt with a lot of difficult struggles in our lives personally and as a group, and I think that's something we would have to deal with the way that we know how, like Janice had said.
I kind of want to go back to the question that was on the table when we lost power, as it were. The person who said that they had lived with a mother who had threatened suicide, and what that was like for her. That was my experience also, and we absolutely would welcome somebody to attend the group that had had that experience. I just wanted to make that clear. And what a difficult place that is, because part of what happens for me, what happened was that in my young mind, I learned, oh, suicide is a viable option. This is, if things get really bad, then yeah, suicide, that's possible. And what a very difficult thing to introduce to a young person, that is the possibility for them. So yeah, absolutely. Be welcome to attend our groups.
Thank you. Janice, you read my mind. I was just going to ask that question. Perfect. Unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes left, and we have a bunch of spectacular questions here. But like I said, we will respond to your question after the webinar via email if we did not get to you.
Do you want to throw one out and we can try to speed through it?
Yeah, we'll take one, and this is maybe one that's not as difficult to answer. Are there groups? They seem to be mainly for youth or for adults. Are there groups that you know of for youth or adolescents?
We just talked with somebody who wants to start an alternatives to suicide peer support group in Framingham for young people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is phenomenally important. We currently do not have any of our groups for young people, and I feel like it really is a next frontier. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think, I think generally speaking, because of the organization we're a part of and our overriding principles, like 16 years old tends to be the youngest that I've experienced someone being in the group.
Yeah.
But I do know that as someone who's been through experiences of feeling suicidal, being part of the psychiatric system in some respect since an adolescent, and also kind of having a lot of different experiences with gender and sexuality, that those younger years are so important and so tumultuous, that I wish this would be developed. And I know we had great conversations with people in Eastern Massachusetts about that possibility, but I don't know of any currently.
So do we have time for one more or not?
Yeah, and this is probably another one that's not, well, it might be complex. It touches on something you mentioned earlier. The person is saying that they're a mental health peer specialist working at a large counseling service. And have you found that the groups work better when the group is under the umbrella of an established service, or is more sort of an independent group, not necessarily tied to any agency?
It depends on the shared values between that agency and our groups. The basic shared values are that people need to be able to attend without fear of repercussion. So again, if the agency has a hard, fast rule / policy that is makes it a no-go, then that wouldn't work. But if the agency does have your shared values, it's great to have the support of other people.
And I will share, as someone who's been through the certified peer specialist training in Massachusetts, and I don't know where you're asking this question from, but I know that part of the training was, as much as we can be supportive for people, we can also be agents for change, and advocates for change. So if there is some sort of agency policy, I'd encourage you to talk to supervisors and explain to them why this kind of group couldn't happen there. And maybe have a conversation with folks about what's part of the agency that wouldn't allow this type of group to happen. So I think that could be an important conversation to have too.
Well, unfortunately, we are
It's
out
like
of
getting
time.
close to 3.
Yeah, we are just about at 3 o'clock here. I want to thank everyone who was here today. We had close to 200 people on for much of the time. Thank you for your interest. A huge, huge thank you to Janice and Sean for a spectacular presentation. And I also want to thank Oryx Cohen, my colleague at NEC and friend, who also took a lead role in organizing. I will
And
email.
and and I do want to note that Oryx took a lead role in helping start the alternatives to suicide peer support groups when working with the Western Mass Recovery Learning community. So thank you,
Thanks.
Oryx.
I will email everyone who registered, letting you know when the recording will be up. Hopefully, in a day or two at the most. And please visit our website, power2u.org, or the Western Mass RLC website for more information. Thank you so much again, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for being
And
here.
again,
Thanks.
Sarah Davidow at Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, if you would like to have this presentation at your place of work or wherever, or your place of play.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.